All right, welcome back to the beautiful Pacific Northwest and PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and real quick, wanted to just let you know that pay attention to your email tomorrow, as it is the first of the month, and I will be letting you know if you won in the free giveaway for February. So there you go. Also, I wanted to say real quick, thank you so much for being here, putting up with me and clearing my throat and drinking my coffee and all these awesome little encounter stories and everything else. I just want to say I truly appreciate you. I love the fact that you're here, and here's the deal. Come spring, I think about the beginning or middle of, I will be back to a regular format of weekly encounter stories for you. Until then, if you need some of that more of that Bigfoot fix, like I do, I'll tell you this. William Jevning, Jevning Research Group, they have some great interviews going on, interview series on YouTube right now. And also, don't forget my friends over at Monster X Radio as well. Not to mention, I don't know about you, but you can comment about this if you want to down below. Have you guys ever listened to those little hour-long, 2-hour-long Bigfoot vocalizations that have been recorded on YouTube? I don't know. I love them. I think they're great. So, all right, let's get to clearing out the throat, drinking some sip of coffee here. All right, let's get to this week's PacWest Bigfoot encounter story. Soda Mountain and the family of Bigfoot. I was getting away to think that day. A day that would change my life forever. I literally watched as a family of Bigfoot passed by completely unaware of my presence. At least at first. I was up towards, well, actually I was on Soda Mountain right before winter in the Pacific Northwest hit. And already there was a light dusting of snow on the ground. It was an amazing event, and to be honest, I think a natural fear of these things is a good thing. But also a sense of wonder is part of the experience. I never felt in any danger, if you know what I mean. But I knew after a few, I had to leave immediately. Here's my encounter story, Dave. Soda Mountain is my sane place. Did you ever have one of those lives where you thought nothing would ever turn out right for you? Like heaven itself was aligned against you? Well, I did. And up until that point in my life, before I really understood and learned more about life and faith, I thought heaven and the world had it out for me. I was married to a real, well, let's just say it is opposite of a winner, to be as kind as possible here. Besides, I know you just want to hear about the Bigfoot, all of them. But what led me to that does matter, and it is part of the whole, I think, of my life that changed that day and has been changed ever since. See, I was in an abusive relationship. I mean, some days it was literally physically abusive. That day I ended up seeing all the craziness I let in my life. I was at my wit's end, and for a bit there, I thought I was going crazy too. But here's what happened, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I'm leaving you. He came home pretty lit up, drunk the night before. We had a few words, and that is when he hit me for the last time. That was it. I was leaving for good. Of course, he would have nothing to do with that, but after I called the sheriff's department, he was actually hauled off and could not stop me from leaving. I packed up what I needed, and only what I needed. I left everything else behind, including the bills that were due in his name. Ha! The big problem was, where do I go now? I had no family nearby. I was from Southern California originally, and without their approval, I had disregarded my parents and their 2-cent opinions at the time when I decided to marry the guy in the first place. And guess I should have listened. Either way, I was low on cash and did not want to listen to the "I told you so" just yet. So I made a simple decision. I was just going to go and sleep in the car for a night or two up around my favorite place, Soda Mountain. It was cold and there was snow, but I loved it up there no matter what the weather. And it was and is to this day one of my most favorite places to just be. I would stay warm with a small fire. I had my own vehicle, a nice Dodge Ram, so staying pretty warm was pretty easy. As for food, I'd bring something with me. I was out. I was leaving. I would never see him again, minus a court appearance about 4 weeks later. Interesting tracks. It was a decent ride up there, and once or twice I remember debating on turning around as the snow was pretty bad. But the old truck, or newer truck, came through just fine, and it was not expected to snow for a couple days from then on anyway. However, it was still a little crazy getting up the mountain. From there I could see everything from Pilot Rock to Mount Shasta beyond. It is truly a beautiful place with a great view. Usually, that is. But in typical Pacific Northwest fashion, that particular time of the year, it was cloudy, and being up that high was right in the middle of them for the most part. So, visibility was pretty low. But here and there I could see the mountains and hills directly across from me through the trees and clouds. I decided to pull over near a ravine that has a pretty great view and take a rest from driving and have a bit of lunch. It was a bit spooky, I have to admit to myself at the time. The clouds floating by and the darkness of the day that gave almost no visibility into the tree line, but maybe 10 to 20 feet or so. Well, it was pretty cool and spooky feeling, that was for sure. I was not scared, though. I was only fearful of one thing, and it was not the woods or the dark. It was the situation I was in up until that day. As I remembered why I was up there, it seemed the gloomy day got brighter, knowing I was free. Well, at least in my mind it did at that moment. What I did find curious, however, were the large tracks in the snow. Who in the world was up here recently barefoot and running around in the snow was beyond me. But there they were, footprints in the snow. I was sitting on the tailgate of my pickup with the window to the camper shell pulled up to keep me dry when I spotted them. It was snowing lightly again. I was taking a bite out of a sandwich I'd made that morning when I looked over to see what looked like tracks from something big moving across the road and down the side of the ravine and into the trees. I hopped out of the truck and took a closer look. I wish I could say there were outlines of toes like some have reported, but it was still snowing and there must have been a small flurry that hit before I got up there, as all I could make out was the basic shape. But it looked like a human foot. There was no mistake about the outline of it at all. They came from the opposite side of the road, as I could see two tracks that fortunately I'd missed with my own tracks of the truck before I parked. They continued on down the small ravine, and I could see they disappeared into the trees. I can say with all honesty as well, I was a little shocked at what I was going through my mind. So much so I decided that I might want to move on up the mountain a little further and crash somewhere else. The tracks did lead down the mountain, so I figured whoever it was, well, they were long gone now and heading in the opposite direction of me. I was wrong. Go figure. A family of Bigfoot. I finally pulled over and felt pretty good and refreshed about the rest of the day and the trip here, for my reason to be there in the first place. I did start a small fire and broke out my chair when the sleety snow stopped falling for a bit. Eventually, though, it turned into a very light snowfall that was not enough to have me open the tailgate and change my sitting arrangements. The afternoon came and left turning into night. I stoked up the fire and eventually backed my car up a bit to where I seemed a bit more closed off to the openness of the road itself and more closed in by the trees. I could hear some distant sounds in the night, coyote for the most part, and although familiar in this part of Oregon, there was a couple howls in the night that I gave up to the canine, but was not completely certain that it was. It would come and go. The sound would last a bit longer than the others, and seemed to be different, or at least a little bit in tonality. But in the end, after hearing it a few times, I gave it up to a larger coyote, a male perhaps. Either way, I was not shaking in my boots like some women alone in the woods might have. I simply listened to the wind, the howling, and fell asleep. The night was completely uneventful, other than the howling here and there. Today, I will concede that I believe the other howls were from Bigfoot. Well, a family of them, a family I would see that very next morning. It had snowed a bit more overnight, but not enough to cause any worry of leaving that area and moving to a new one, which I did later, a hotel room in fact. But I got up, had a bit to eat, some coffee, and gathered my stuff to move up the road a bit further to another favorite little spot with a great view too. An hour later I was there, and that is when my world changed, and I would learn that not only does Bigfoot exist, but they as a species seem to move or travel in groups or families. The little one is cute. I was still cold as all get out, but it was mostly clear by that point. I grabbed some trail mix, my thermos of coffee, and headed down to a little overhang that had a great scenic view of the mountains beyond and an open ravine below with a small runoff of water that ran through the middle of it. I took a seat after setting down a thick towel on the outcrop and opened my thermos. I was taking a drink when I thought I noticed some movement below me about 50 to 60 yards away, or less. I figured elk or deer perhaps at first, but what I saw had come slowly out of the tree line. It was neither. It came out and bent down at the waist, much like a giant gorilla would. It went down from 2 legs to what seemed its legs and arms, basically on all 4s. The fact it walked out first on 2 legs is what startled me. Now, it stood there, still as a statue and tall too. From where I was at, though, I could not tell exactly how tall because of my then current position. But if I were to guess, it was well past the top of my truck cab by a couple, 2 or 3 heads. But I could definitely see it was not a person, although for a split second I thought it was because it walked out. It was covered in hair, and not short, tufted fur, but long, flowing-like hair, I could tell. It was a reddish-brown color, and it was massive in width. What really caught my attention was the fact it had breasts, too. The arms were long, really, really long. I get what people who have seen these things say about them. And for sure it seemed to walk with a slight hunch at the waist, like an extremely large or massive monkey or ape more like it. However, during this whole experience, the light was too bright to make out faces. The backlight and reflection of the snow cut that down to almost nothing. However, the heads, I could tell, sat straight on top their shoulders, as if there were no neck at all. And I say their heads for a reason. She was not alone. Suddenly, another one came walking out, but this time it did not go to all 4s. It stood there, looking down the ravine, as the other one finally stood up. The second one was a darker reddish-brown for sure, and taller than the one I assumed was a female. And that was not the end of my shock. Suddenly, and walking on 2 legs as well, came a smaller, maybe 3-foot tall one of these things, grabbing the hair on the back end of the taller male. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the mountain devil, that was all that started running through my head. I was swimming in my mind all of a sudden. It was like being in some crazy dream as I stared at these 3 creatures or animals as they then started to move around. I believe they were standing there for some time just inside the tree line looking about, making sure it was clear to pass on through. The younger one was a very deep brown color, seemed almost black when the clouds would hide the sun. It started circling the taller one, the male, and it was always keeping one hand on it as it did. The female moved over towards the stream that was coming down off the mountain I was up on. The other 2 followed her, and soon they were all on all 4s, leaning over, drinking straight out of the water. Now, I know that my encounter experience may not be as hair-raising as some, but I think I had the opportunity to watch some pretty awesome behavioral aspects of these things, which was truly a blessing. I did at the time feel all the above, excited, fearful, and in complete awe. Of course, I think the fear part was creeping up as I watched them drink and stare out again down the ravine. Moments later, the male moved back to the tree line, fast, and made it there in what seemed to be about 4 or 5 long strides. Not a second later, it came back with what seemed to be a bloody stump of a deer or elk leg, I suppose, dragging on the ground as it walked back over to the other two. They continued drinking as they came back over and stood there behind them as if waiting for them. That is when my freak-out began. I heard what seemed like a weird shriek-like bark or short scream. The little one was suddenly standing there with its long arms wrapped suddenly around the female and looking up in my direction. Next thing I knew, I was being screamed at by the female and the male, and he seemed to be making a beeline all of a sudden, straight up the mountain towards me as he did. I stood with my heart sinking into my chest and pounding before I turned, grabbed my thermos, and then ran for the car as fast as I could. I still heard the hollering as I started up the truck and with the windows up. It was that loud. I could not turn around as quickly as I knew I would need to with that monster of a thing coming up the hill that fast. So instead, I peeled out and drove further up the mountain about 3 to 5 minutes before I turned around and headed back down. Home again. I looked off to the side of the road as I passed the area again. I did not see anything, but I did not slow down to really take a look either. I was pretty frightened at the time. In my mind, I was heading back home, but not until I hit the main highway back did I realize that that family of Bigfoot had something I did not at the time. A home. Sad as it sounds, I was okay with the thought suddenly as I started to realize what I just witnessed. Something only a small handful of people in history have had, an actual Bigfoot sighting, and not just one Bigfoot, but a family. Years later, today, while I'm not really supposed to talk about it due to my job situation, could possibly make me seem crazy and I could lose my job, I just had to say something. So please, Dave, don't use my last name. Today I live in Southern California. I have married again, but this time to a great man who actually believes my story and wants to soon head up that way and check out the area I had my encounter together as a family. But I'm still a little apprehensive about the idea personally. I'm not sure if I am ready to see those things just yet. But that is my encounter story, and thank you. Kara.